What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are going to kind of cheat a little bit. And we're going to sort of bypass the first story arcs of Superman and Action Comics by Brian Michael Bendis. And I know a lot of you guys are just kind of like, no. But hear me out for a second, hear me out. So what Bendis basically did with Action Comics Volume 1 and Superman Volume 1 is essentially the same thing he did with New Avengers Volume 1, but spread over two different comics. So for those of you guys who are not familiar with Brian Michael Bendis, Bendis has been a part of the comic book industry for a long time, like probably running up on 18 years now, and even before that if you count indie publications. And the idea behind this was that where Bendis did things like Ultimate Universe and so on and so forth, in Marvel in the early to mid 2000s, they basically canceled Avengers and then relaunched it as New Avengers. And so what Bendis did in the first story arc, which was called Breakout, was basically establish the New Avengers, right? Like basically tell us like what the new roster was going to be, who was going to be part of it, and why they were going to be part of it. So you got like Spider-Man, you got Luke Cage, I think it was, you got like Wolverine, Iron Man, Captain America, so on and so forth. And it was kind of just laying the groundwork for the new team. That's basically what he did with Action and Superman. Action Comics was just kind of a 6-issue glorified arc of Bendis just being like, hey, this is my Superman book now. And he did that by basically introducing Rogolzar and saying like he's the reason why Krypton was originally destroyed. For some people, it was a cool story arc. For others, it was unnecessary. But regardless of the circumstance, with Superman Volume 1, all that did was basically come off the heels of Action Comics and have like the Earth thrown into the Phantom Zone. So we can cover those at a future point in time if you want, but they're not really necessary, not by any standard of measurement. Really, to understand this, all you have to know is that Mr. Oz, the father of Superman, basically came back and then told Jonathan Kent, like, I want to take you on a tour of the galaxy in order to help you better understand your powers and your place in the greater picture so that you can become a more effective superhero. And then Lois Lane went along with him. That's basically it. Like that's really all that happened that pertains to this. Everything else is kind of unnecessary fluff. But again, I kind of leave it to you guys. You guys may want to see it, you guys may not want to see it. It's really your call. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but again, it is Brian Michael Bendis. And so it may all come kind of, wrap back around later on. We don't really know. But the idea behind this is that, again, this basically picks up with the idea that Jonathan Kent is aged up into a teenager. Now, the cool thing about this is that we don't know exactly how this happened. I mean, we are kind of given an explanation, insofar as Jonathan Kent says, we basically ended up orbiting a black hole, so time traveled faster for me than it did for you, and so I essentially just aged up. Now, we may get like a more in-depth explanation later on, but all this part really does, the return of Superboy, is really just explain what he's been doing at the time, between the time that he originally left Superman and the time that he showed up here. Now, kind of a cool moment that really came out of that was the conversation that took place between Jor-El and Superman himself, when Jor-El basically says, you're really nothing more than a stopgap measure. That Superman's just a guy who's there and like fights some bad guys and occasionally Darkseid, and like that's it. He's basically, getting cats out of trees and stopping robberies and not doing anything that really makes humanity better. And it was kind of cool. It was actually a really cool introspective look at the character of Superman. But again, with Jonathan Kent showing back up here, it's almost one of these things where there's more questions than answers, because it's kind of like, okay, what's going on? And it's kind of funny because initially, like, Superman doesn't actually believe it's his son, because it's like, well, as far as Superman's concerned, Jonathan's only been gone for 3 weeks. But from Jonathan's perspective, he's been gone for years. And so it's kind of cool because, of course, he grabs his son, he ends up racing back home to Lois Lane because, of course, she's since returned by this point in time. And then she's kind of freaking out like a mom does, right? Like, oh my God, my baby, my baby's back. That is kind of, it's kind of a funny thing to see. And this is where Bendis really shines as a writer. When he's going hard to the paint and like writing one heck of a story, he's almost second to none. And he captures human emotion like incredibly well. But like kind of seeing like Lois Lane freaking out about her son, and so on and so forth, and almost kind of like blaming Jor-El for like why it is a Superboy aged up. What he does is kind of say, okay, look, let's go ahead and have the conversation about what it is that's been happening this entire time. And it's cool because when they were brought onto the ship of Jor-El, what he basically said is, look, you guys kind of have your own quarters here on like this giant space station, more or less, that we're staying on, and you guys can customize them, you guys can make them your own. And it's kind of cool because at this point, it's really Jonathan Kent outside the purview of his father. And this is very important here. And the reason why is because for Jonathan Kent as a character, where Superman taught him a lot of the very important lessons, the idea that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, but if you have the ability to fix something, you have the responsibility to fix something. Because he passed a lot of those very important lessons on to his son, it did help Jonathan to grow as kind of a young man coming into his own. But at the end of the day, he was under the shadow of his father. And he was also kind of chasing this idea of wanting to become a member of the Teen Titans. But with all that basically out of the picture, because Jonathan wanted to go with his grandfather, because he wasn't allowed to be on the Teen Titans, because he's kind of outside of that now, it's one of these things where like the galaxy is his oyster, he's bound by nothing. And it's Jonathan kind of coming to terms with that and saying like, well, now it's just a clean slate. Like the idea is for me to go out into the galaxy to kind of gain a better understanding of myself, and that's what we're gonna do. And his grandfather takes him on a litany of adventures by basically saying, your father has been fighting on Earth, really just kind of being a piece of bubblegum in a wall, stopping what appears to be a leak, which is in reality a giant flood, and he doesn't really know what's actually going on. What you need to understand is that you have a much larger role to play in the galaxy and even the universe itself than your father does. You can be better than what your father is. Your father is not living up to his true potential. And so it's kind of one of these things of saying like, Jonathan, you can be greater than your father. You just have to get some perspective. And so what he does is literally take him out, have him face off against the Dominators, different things like that. And then of course, Lois Lane puts on a suit designed to kind of allow her body to adapt to like the deep space environment due to like the rigors that space can have on the normal human form. But of course, Jonathan's also taken to this intergalactic trade place where like there's some shady people. It's almost like Mos Eisley, but it's kind of cool because what it does is it shows like the bigger picture of Superman, right? So like when they land on this planet, because of the fact that Lois is wearing the crest of El, wearing like the house crest of the House of El, when she shows up here, people start paying her special attention. And where she initially starts to think of, oh, hey, well, you know, it's kind of based on the nature of Superman, the response to Jor-El is, no, they see you as like a savior, somebody who's basically going to like make their lives better. And so what this is designed to do is really kind of point to the notion that the legacy of Superman and really his reputation precedes him in the sense that it's not just Superman and the actions he's committed on Earth, it's Superman and the fact that his reputation extends into the galaxy itself, yet again hitting on the notion that Superman's not living up to his full potential. And so again, it's kind of interesting because when you look at his character and you look at like what Jonathan Kent's learning here, it's kind of a much bigger expanse of the idea that Superman can't be everywhere at once. But the reality of the situation is that Superman can fly to other planets. Superman can travel through space to other parts of the galaxy and even other parts of the universe. And so the question is, if Superman is only fighting on Earth, then it's almost like Superman is just saving people in like one neighborhood on the entirety of Earth. It's really kind of that perspective. He's saving people only on one planet in a infinitely expanding universe full of like a potentially infinite number of planets. And so it's like he's not really doing much in the greater span of things. And again, that's what Jor-El's hitting home to Jonathan Kent. Now, the cool thing about this is when Jonathan meets Lobo for the first time, and it's kind of awesome because when when Lobo meets him, he's just kind of like, yeah, so like you're like the super kid. And like right off the bat, Jonathan's kind of like, no, you can call me Superboy. And this is cool. This is one of the coolest interactions because what this does is it shows how emboldened Superboy's become. And what it means is that his confidence is increasing because what Bendis is doing is building the character of Superboy off of like the Super Sons. And if you go back and you read the Super Sons the way it was written, Superboy lacked confidence. He didn't really believe in himself in a way that he should have. He understood his powers, or at least as they existed at the time, and he knew what he wanted to achieve. But there's a difference between having a goal and having the confidence to shoot for that goal. And so where he was really young, he was unsure of himself. What this is showing is that in these various skirmishes that are happening both on panel and off panel, he's becoming a lot more confident and a lot more assertive, especially when you're talking about speaking up to somebody like Lobo, who can easily go toe-to-toe with Superman, if not defeat him, depending on who's writing the story at the time. And so it's kind of this cool thing, because when Lobo starts talking to him, he basically says, look, like, maybe you don't know this, kid. You're not a man when someone tells you you are. You're a man when you decide. Now, this is incredibly important. It's astronomically important because one of the things that we kind of deal with for a lot of you guys who are young, it's almost kind of like this coming of age thing, right? Like you will cross a line and like the world will recognize you as an adult, right? Like they'll recognize you as being like an adult. And, on Earth, like that number is basically 18 or 21, depending on how you want to look at it. You can fight in the military at 18, but you really can't drink alcohol in the States until you're 21. So depending on how you want to look at it, what's really being told to us here is that outside the planet Earth, outside this small little mud ball in like this huge giant universe, there's no rules out there. It's no man's land. You do what you can to get what you can, and you're literally just making your way in the universe. And so because of the fact that Superboy's in a world where there are no rules, you become a man when you say you're a man, when you're old enough to stick up for your own, when you're old enough to basically protect you and your own. And so it's kind of cool here because that's what Lobo's basically saying. Like, yes, you look like a kid, but if you're old enough to do your own, if you're old enough to make your way in the universe, then you're a man. You're a man when you decide that you want to be, when you want to stop being a child and stop viewing things as a child and acting like like a child. This is very important. This is very, very huge because of course, what we also end up finding out here is that there's basically kind of like this slave trade going on. Now, it's not a great big huge focal point of the story, but it's a focal point insofar as Superboy shows up and literally just starts like attacking these slave traders and just kind of destroying them, wiping them out everywhere he can, defeating them, and so on and so forth. But this is a very important thing because where Lois ends up traveling back to Earth and basically leaving Superboy with his grandfather, Superboy begins to sort of look at Jor-El and seeing Jor-El for the kind of lessons he's imposing on Jonathan Kent. And this is something that I hope you're noticing here, that what Jor-El is really imposing on Jonathan Kent is do what it takes and forget morality, that you do whatever it takes to win. And it really kind of fires directly against what Superman's been teaching his son the entire time. And this is important because what this means is that if Superboy were to adopt this philosophy and say, I will do whatever I need to do in order to achieve my goal, then you really become nothing better than the people that you're fighting against, right? Like there's no differentiation between the good guys and the bad guys if you adopt that philosophy, if you adopt that ideology. What differentiates the good guys and the bad guys is the good guys basically have a kind of moral code and saying like, I will do what I need to do in order to win this fight, so long as I don't cross this line I've created for myself. That is one of these things where Jonathan's beginning to learn that his grandfather is essentially insane. And that's exactly what he tells Superman and Lois. Jor-El's crazy and we have to find a way to stop this guy. So again, it's cool here and it's really, really intriguing because again, a lot of the stuff that sort of went on, we don't really know. Like we don't really know what other things happened in the life of Superboy and Jor-El that led him kind of down this path to believing that his grandfather's basically insane. And that's what we're kind of waiting on Bendis to explain to us. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.